I will now turn to James Lamont, former managing editor of FT and currently he's a board member and head of partnerships at FT. James is going to speak about challenges that the FT and English media, British media in general are confronting, particularly on the technology side. Over to you, James.
Thanks so much, Siddharth. Can I just check that you can hear me properly?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Well, hello, everybody from London. Thank you for inviting me to this media discussion for the G20 meetings in New Delhi. I'd especially like to thank you, Siddharth, and the Indian Organizing Committee for pulling this group of media executives together to raise the profile of press freedom amongst G20 nations. It's a really important issue, and I applaud your effort to drag it onto the agenda. It's really highly valuable to hear colleagues' perspectives from across the world, and I've really appreciated listening over the past hour or two to these contributions. And Siddharth, on a lighter note, today is a first for me. It's the first time I've joined a Zoom call where the chair has the freedom to smoke a pipe. So I'm James Lamont, a Financial Times board director, and as Siddharth said, formerly the FT's managing editor. Before that, I was the newspaper's South Asia bureau chief based in New Delhi, which is a regional context I know well, but which is clearly evolving. And for me, it was very sobering to hear N. Ram's comments earlier about the state of journalism in India, among many of the other contributions from colleagues from Turkey, from Burma, Myanmar, and elsewhere. So the FT is headquartered in London, where fortunately independent media and media freedoms are well established. This is something we can never take for granted, however. As an international media company, the FT has correspondents based in 33 countries, and we have first-hand experience of how freely or not they and other reporters can operate in these different environments, many of them in G20 countries. I think, Siddharth, earlier you referenced some of the troubles, for instance, we have in covering Russia or China. In some cases, these reporters encounter considerable restrictions and risks in getting the news out into the public domain. So I want to signal the FT's strong support for the value of independent journalism and the freedom of the press, and for those industry bodies, publications, and individuals that uphold these standards that are, above all, and we have to remind ourselves, are a benefit to democratic societies. There are 4 issues that I want to highlight briefly. I'm conscious of the short time. They're all cross-border issues and as such G20 issues. All of them pertain to the digital transformation of news as we transition from newspaper models. Broadly, I want to point towards solutions between leading publishers rather than simply air concerns, which are now in many cases well known across our industry. So the first, and I'm not the first to say this on this call, is misinformation and fake news. This has proliferated in the digital era, where increasingly readers get their news from social media and not from recognized and established media brands. It can sway public opinion, influence election outcomes, and in some cases, so blatantly mislead that it can cause serious harm. And I know that's a particular concern in India with the heightened risk of communalism. I'd like to draw your attention to the work of, as a solution to the work of the Trusted News Initiative. This is an international initiative started by the BBC. Publishers like the FT, the Hindu, Reuters, and the Washington Post, and many others join forces to combat fake news in a dialogue with some of the big tech platforms like Google, Microsoft, and Facebook. One of its activities, to give you an example, is an alert system across newsrooms and their social media teams to alert news editors to a trending piece of fake news. and then to persuade the digital platforms to deprioritize these. Another is to share verified data sets like election results as they are announced and when they're available. The point I really want to make here is that coalitions can work and collaboration between news organizations. So there is an opportunity here, Siddharth, to frame this more within a G20 agenda. One of the hottest topics here in London since the launch of ChatGPT is generative AI applications in journalism. This confronts us all. It has advantages and disadvantages. And clearly, there are many advantages to the publishing model in areas like advertising, marketing, search functions, curation, and summarization. The big question we will all have to answer is how this influences content journalism itself, and whether the reader can determine what is written by a human and what is written by a machine or a bot. At the FT, we've tried to frame a set of editorial and commercial principles about the use of AI. These principles will no doubt evolve as the AI evolves, but in brief, our editor, Rula Khalaf, has given assurance to readers that FT journalism is made by humans using our world-class standards of attribution, sourcing, and fact-checking, and not machine-generated. She did this in an open letter that you can find online. Again, I'd say of relevance to a G20 community. To give you an example, 3 of these principles are not to allow AI to compromise the integrity of our journalism, to commit to respecting data privacy, and third, to protect our own intellectual property, brand, and business. All fairly fundamental elements to publishing, but again, worth restating. On the issue of intellectual property protection, and it came up in one of the first contributions from La Repubblica, that it's clear that some technology companies have scraped leading publications around the world for their large language models. And we've noticed with interest the coalition forming in the US to seek redress and possible financial compensation for this. A question we should ask ourselves is whether this coalition should be expanding to publishers right across the G20 and not just in the US. A third highlight is the cyber threat to publishers and publishing systems. This is an escalating threat. In some cases, these threats are state-backed. They have enormous potential to disrupt and are hugely costly. One of our primary threats is a bad actor breaking into our publishing system and changing content or jamming the website or crashing the website altogether. Another big threat is a ransom-style attack where systems are breached, data accessed, and then money demanded, sometimes millions of pounds, not to release the data into the public domain. This rarely enters the public domain because many companies don't want to disclose that they have been hacked in this way. But these protections require massive resources and constant vigilance. And this is a very new and deadly type of electronic threat to journalism. And finally, I want to highlight the difficulties that many media organizations face with their commercial models in an age of digital disruption. And Siddharth, you mentioned this in your initial remarks. Unable to sustain advertising and subscription models, many smaller titles and regional titles weaken and then close down. I know you all are very familiar with this scenario, but this is a really big blow to diversity in the media. And in this environment, it's super difficult to find the levels of investment required for sustaining quality journalism and independent newsrooms. At the Nikkei, and I should mention that we're owned by a Japanese publisher, Nikkei, we are open to sharing our own experience of what works for us to stay in and grow our business as a private enterprise with no government involvement. And we try, where possible, to join forums like the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism in Oxford where we can lend our own perspectives on commercial success to help others stay afloat. Again, a G2 grouping around the commercial mechanics of publishing might be helpful here too. Siddharth, I'll leave it there. Thank you for listening to my contribution, and back to you in India.
Thank you very much, James. Very, very useful points, actionable points that we can, hope to build on in our collaborations across G20 countries. So thank you for focusing on the technology and the business side and the cyber threat side. This is very valuable stuff.